Gideon Nash tightened the saddlebag strap and looked down at the withered piece of paper in his hand. Just one signature in the old, weathered house on the edge of town would be his. Purchase price, $5. Too good of a deal to pass up. He pushed the door open. The smell of rotting wood and dust clung to every breath. The evening sun streamed through a torn curtain, casting floating specks across the floor like the ashes of a life someone had left behind. Then he heard something, a ragged breath, a faint creaking of rope against wood. Gideon turned his head. The back door of the house stood ajar, swaying slightly in the breeze. And there, a tall Apache girl hung by a rope, her hands tied behind her back. Her feet touched the ground, but her body sagged, every breath a final battle. In that moment, Gideon did not think. He rushed forward, drew the small knife from his belt, and sliced through the rope. She collapsed heavy and solid, like a warrior who had walked through hell. Her calloused hands grabbed onto his shirt, leaving bloody smears behind. Her dark eyes fluttered open, wild but blazing with life. "Are you the owner?" Her voice was like a blade dragged across stone. Gideon nodded. "I just bought it." She gave a soft laugh, as if that was funnier than death itself. "Then you bought more than a house." Her breath stuttered. "You bought my life." Gideon clenched his jaw. Outside, the wind carried the distant sound of hooves. Someone was coming to take back what he had just freed, and he knew for $5 he had bought himself a war. Gideon carried the girl into the house. The wooden floor groaned beneath his every step. Her body was heavy, like a soldier returning from their final battle. He laid her down on a dust-covered couch, then rushed off to find some water. She struggled to sit up, her trembling hand pressed against her neck where the rope had left a deep, angry red mark, like death had branded her. Gideon handed her a bowl of water. She looked at him, her eyes wary like a wild animal cornered. "Go ahead and drink," he said softly. "I am not going to hurt you." She hesitated, then took slow, cautious sips. Her breathing began to steady, but suspicion still burned in her gaze. Gideon walked over to the dining table. An old, dust-covered envelope lay squarely in the center, as if waiting for someone to come and unlock the secrets of this house. Scrawled on the front were just a few words. "To the new owner, please save her." He tore the envelope open. Inside was a hastily written letter, the handwriting shaky but determined. "My name is Emmeline Fry. The girl beside you, she is bound by Vickers through false laws and debt. I tried to free her, but I failed. I left her behind in despair. If you are a good man, please protect her. If not, Vickers will come to reclaim what he calls his property." Gideon's voice lowered as he reached the final line. He clenched the letter in his fist. "Who are you?" Gideon asked, turning back to her. The girl met his eyes. Her voice was hoarse, but strong. "My name is Zinea, a warrior of the Apache tribe." Gideon nodded. "Why were you hanging in that room?" Zinea narrowed her eyes and tilted her head slightly toward the window. "Because I fought him. I refused to be anyone's slave." Her words came out like a growl held back for too long. "Hung, but not killed," Gideon said, his tone dark. "He wants to come back for you." Zinea exhaled hard. "If he returns, I will kill him." Gideon looked at the wounds across her body, the bruised but powerful muscles. A true warrior, pushed to the edge. "You might kill one man," Gideon said, "but he will come back with 10 more. I am not afraid to die." Gideon folded his arms across his chest and replied plainly, "Well, I do not want you dying in my house." A long silence followed. Zinea looked at him, the edge in her gaze softening just a little. Gideon brought over another blanket and laid it gently over her. "When you are strong enough, we will talk more. But one thing is certain." He pulled the door shut, his hand resting on the gun atop the table. "The man who hung you will be back soon." Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling red dust across the yard. Zinea slowly closed her eyes. Her breath was shallow, but the fire of defiance still burned within her. Gideon understood one thing clearly. He had bought this house for $5, but the price he was going to pay from now on would be in blood. Night fell quickly on the edge of town. The wooden boards over the windows rattled with every gust of wind. Gideon tossed more firewood into the stove, the flames casting flickering light across Zenea's face, revealing every bruise on her skin. She sat leaning against the wall, her hand clenched tightly around the handle of a broken axe beside her, a cruel reminder that though she had strength, she had been stripped of the right to wield it. "Do you hear them?" Gideon asked, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. Zenea gave a slight nod. "Something is coming." The sound of hooves echoed faintly in the distance, each beat heavy like a strike to the chest. Gideon pulled out his revolver and checked the bullets. His gaze was steady, without a trace of fear. Ever since he read that letter, he knew this fight was already his. Zenea tried to rise. Her legs trembled, but her eyes were sharp as spearheads. "I will fight," she said. Gideon placed a firm hand on her shoulder, easing her back down. "You were just cut down from a rope less than an hour ago. Save your life." "I do not hide behind anyone," she growled. "Good," Gideon replied shortly. "But at least let me take the first shot." A deliberate knock rang out. Thud, thud. The two of them exchanged a glance. Zenea gripped the axe handle with every ounce of defiant fury she had left. Gideon cracked the door open. A man in a long coat stood at the steps. His smile was crooked, like a mask slipping off a liar's face. "You must be Gideon Nash, right?" His voice was calm, like he already knew the answer. "You just bought this house. This house belongs to me. And everything inside it does too," Gideon said, pressing each word. The man smirked. "You are mistaken. This house is worth $5,000. The girl owes me." He peeked inside and saw Zenea struggling to her feet. No, that's my warrior," Zenea shouted, her voice rough and raw. "I do not belong to you." He tipped his hat, his tone icy. "Vickers has a message. By morning, I will return. This time, with a court order." Gideon stepped in close, their faces just inches apart. "Every time you come, I will stop you." One of the henchmen behind him let out a mocking laugh. "Stop us. You and what army?" Gideon slammed the door before they could say another word. In the dark, the sound of hooves pounded the dirt road, then faded away like a promise that the storm would return. Zenea looked at Gideon, her voice low but no longer filled with doubt. "You know he will come back. With more men. And the law on his side. Then," Gideon lifted the axe and placed it into her hands. "We will fight." Zenea gripped the handle with her entire spirit. "I will not let him hang me again." Gideon blew out the lamp and slung the rifle over his shoulder. Outside, the night sky pressed down on the house with a silence as heavy as stone. The battle had been set, and by morning, the verdict would be delivered. As the night wore on, the wind grew colder. The old wooden beams creaked as if they might collapse at any moment. Gideon gathered a few worn-out sacks and wedged them into the windows, then locked every door tight. The firelight danced across the walls, casting shadows of two people, a man who had once lost everything, and a warrior who had been forced to kneel. In their own ways, both were learning how to stand again. Zenea pushed herself up, still unsteady, but her broad shoulders looked like they could carry the storm itself. "I owe you a thank you," she said, her voice softer than before. "You do not owe me anything," Gideon replied, still watching the darkness beyond the glass. "You saved me without even knowing who I was," she continued. "Most would have left someone like me behind." Gideon's grip tightened on his gun. He sat across from her, his eyes heavy, like they were reaching back into memories he had tried hard to bury. "Back then," he began slowly, "I owned a big ranch up north. My wife and my son both died during the epidemic." Zenea studied his face closely. Beneath the hardened exterior were wounds that had never healed. "I sold the land," Gideon went on, his voice rough, "because I could no longer take the silence of that house. I left behind their graves. Left everything behind." He looked her straight in the eyes. "But I swore I would never leave anyone behind again." Zenea said nothing. For the first time, her gaze held no defense or defiance. Only rare empathy from a warrior who had endured too much betrayal. "Vickers," she said softly, "promised to protect my people. Then he bound us with debts and laws we never understood. When I resisted, He tied me up and said my strength was only good for his entertainment and to threaten my own. She gritted her teeth, her hand tightening around the axe handle until her knuckles turned white. I would rather die than be used by him again. Gideon nodded. You will not die by his hands. The air between them was heavy, but warmed by one undeniable truth. They had both lost their families, but now, they might be the last shield each other had. An owl called out from the rooftop, a signal of something watching. Zinnia stood straighter, as if even a single glance from her could shatter fear itself. Tomorrow, she said, he will return with more men. And maybe with the law that tries to force you to kneel. Gideon gave a faint smile, the kind only a man who had walked through all his grief could manage. If his law is a chain, then I will use this gun to break every single link. The fire crackled, reflected in both of their eyes. They were no legends from stories, just two people who refused to bow, and when morning came, they would stand together. Thank you so much for being here. If this story brought back old memories of dusty afternoons, of hoofbeats echoing in your chest, please subscribe to my channel, so each day we can sit down again, and I will tell you another story from the Wild West. The night wind howled through the loose wooden boards. Gideon and Zinnia split tasks like two old soldiers who had fought side by side for years. He checked the guns and ammunition. She sharpened a kitchen knife she had found in the old cabinets. Zinnia glanced around the small house, her eyes scanning every corner, like she was calculating where it might break first. This place is too old to hold for long, she noted. Gideon slid a sack of dried grain against the door, both to block the draft and create a barrier. We do not need it to stand forever. Just until morning. Zinnia pressed her lips together and nodded. Suddenly, the sound of hooves echoed from beyond the gate. It was not Vickers, but there was something cautious in its rhythm. Gideon signaled with a sharp hand motion. Both of them moved against the wall, weapons ready. A figure stood on the porch and knocked 3 times. Thud, thud, thud. Gideon motioned for patience. Then a voice called out, "It's me, Marshal Briggs." Zinnia narrowed her eyes. "Who is that?" "Town Sheriff," Gideon whispered back, but his voice held a note of doubt. Gideon cracked the door, gun still in hand but pointed low. Briggs stepped inside, brushing dust off his coat, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the red, bruised rope mark across Zinnia's neck. "He did that to you?" Briggs asked, his voice laced with restrained anger. Zinnia answered plainly, "He wanted me to belong to him." Briggs gripped the brim of his hat tight. "Vickers has leveraged debts on at least 12 families in this town, but no one has had enough evidence to bring him down." Gideon glanced at Zinnia. "Until now?" Briggs nodded firmly, his hand resting on the leather pouch at his side. "We found part of the documents Emmeline left behind. If we combine them with a living witness, her, we can drag him straight to hell." Zinnia smirked. "I am ready to face him. No more hiding." Briggs turned to Gideon. "But to take this to court, you'll need to cover the remaining debt, even if it's the filth he created." Gideon did not hesitate. "I will pay, as long as he never lays a hand on her again." Briggs placed a hand on Gideon's shoulder, a gesture of respect. "Men like you, Nash, they are rare." Outside, a strong gust slammed into the porch roof. Briggs added, "I will return at first light with the arrest warrant, but you need to keep her alive until then." Zinnia gave a dry laugh. "I do not die that easily." Briggs smiled faintly, then pulled the door closed behind him. His silhouette faded into the night. Inside, Gideon looked at Zinnia. A few more hours till dawn. She stood tall, her muscles flexing beneath sun-darkened skin. "Then let's turn this rotting house into our last fortress." They tightened their grip on their weapons, and outside, the storm began to stir. The eastern sky had just begun to streak with a thin line of orange. Dawn had yet to break, but the dry wind and swirling dust swept into the yard like a warning that something terrible was about to arrive. Gideon and Zinnia stood behind the door, each holding a weapon at the ready. The sound of hooves echoed, but this time, it was no longer scattered. It was a whole group. Zinnia peered through the crack in the door. Dozens of mounted men, town riders, lined up on horseback with rifles strapped to their saddles. At the front rode Vickers, his long coat billowing in the wind, a cruel smile twisting across his face. He held up a stack of papers high in the air. Gideon Nash, open the door. By the law of this town, that house and what is hiding inside it belong to me. Gideon pulled the door open and stepped onto the porch, revolver in hand but pointed to the ground. He has no right to claim a person, he said clearly. There is nothing here that belongs to you. Vickers let out a laugh, like he had just heard a joke. This Apache woman is in debt. By contract, she is property. Zinnia stepped outside, the red bruises from the rope still marking her neck. Her voice was low, like stone tumbling down a mountain. I do not belong to anyone. Some of the riders frowned. The fierce confidence in her eyes made them waver. Vickers' tone sharpened, his voice hissing. If you hand her over now, I might let you keep that rotting house. Gideon stepped forward, placing himself entirely between her and the mob. If you want to touch her, you will have to go through me first. The air snapped tight, a silence stretched like a drawn bowstring. One of Vickers' men fired a warning shot into the sky. Horses reared and whinnied, the ground trembled. Zinnia leaned toward Gideon, her voice barely a whisper. If we fight, we will not go down easy. Gideon squinted. We do not fight to win. We fight to show them this is wrong. Vickers shouted, I will take her, and your land too. Zinnia gripped the axe tighter. Try it. Just as the standoff reached its peak, a familiar long coat came charging in on horseback. Marshal Briggs pulled hard on the reins, stopping his horse between both sides. No one enforces the law like bandits around here anymore. He raised a stamped folder high above his head. Warrant for the arrest of Vickers on charges of fraud and unlawful seizure of property. The crowd of riders stirred in confusion. Vickers yanked his reins in fury. Briggs, you dare stand against my money? Briggs replied firmly. I stand for justice. He turned to Gideon and Zinnia, eyes steady. You two did the right thing. Vickers' men hesitated. A few even lowered their weapons. But Vickers, face twisted with rage, drew his gun and aimed it straight at Zinnia. You will not live long enough to testify. Time froze. Zinnia stared straight into the barrel, unblinking. Gideon shouted, No. A gunshot rang out. Bang! Dust exploded from the ground. Birds scattered from the rooftop in a rush of wings. Someone had been shot, but no one knew who yet. The gunshot faded, leaving a haze of smoke lingering in the early light of dawn. A scream of pain rang out. It was not Gideon. And it was not Zinnia. One of the riders behind Vickers clutched his shoulder and toppled off his horse. He stared wide-eyed at his own gun, as if he could not believe the bullet had disobeyed him. In a flash, Zinnia moved in. She swung the axe handle hard and struck the barrel of Vickers' pistol, knocking it clean from his hand. He stumbled backward, face drained of all color. Marshal Briggs spurred his horse forward, his voice cracking like thunder. Vickers, you are under arrest for attempted murder and unlawful seizure of property. Drop your weapon now. But Vickers had snapped. Panic took over. He pulled a small knife hidden in his sleeve and lunged at Zinnia. Instinct took hold. She swung the axe, slamming it into his wrist. The knife clattered to the ground. Zinnia grabbed the front of his coat and roared. You wanted to hang me again, did you? Vickers gasped, his voice trembling with fear. Do not kill me. I do not need to kill you. Zinnia growled through gritted teeth. I just need the truth. Gideon stepped in and placed a hand on her shoulder. His eyes told her what needed no words. Justice must be done by law, not blood. Briggs signaled 2 riders to cuff Vickers. Some of his men ran off, while the others dropped their guns. What was about to become a bloodbath had been stopped by the courage of 2 people who had already lost too much. As Vickers was dragged away, he shouted, still trying to cling to power, this is not over. No court will believe the garbage that comes out of an Apache's mouth. Gideon grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him close. Do you not get it? He said, his voice cold and steady as stone. No one belongs to you. Not anymore. Never again. Briggs placed a hand on Gideon's shoulder and gently pulled him back. That is enough. Let the law handle the rest now. Vickers was bound and dragged away under the scornful stares of the riders and the townsfolk who had started to gather, wondering what had happened. Gideon turned to Zinnia. She stood tall, the rope's bruises still visible on her neck. But her eyes were lighter, as if a weight that had crushed her for so long had finally been lifted. You all right? Gideon asked softly. Zinnia exhaled deeply, resting the axe on the ground. I have waited a long time for this day. She raised a hand to her neck, brushing the bruise. It still hurt, but it was proof she had survived. Briggs looked at the two of them, offering a rare smile. Tomorrow at the town hall, we finish this properly with signatures and stamps. Gideon nodded. Tomorrow, no more running. Zinnia nodded back, her chin held high, the stance of someone who had just reclaimed their freedom. As the dust settled, Gideon stepped back into the house and picked up the small knife, the same one he had used to cut the rope the night before. He stared at it for a moment, then gripped it tightly. Word spread quickly through town. The Apache girl lived, and with that news came hope for those who had been robbed by Vickers. But while many rejoiced, Vickers was dragged away in chains. And a man like him does not accept defeat easily. The sun rose fully, golden light spilling across the wide prairie. The storm had passed, leaving hoofprints and scuffs in the dirt. But the air felt strangely peaceful, as if the land itself was relieved that justice was not yet extinct in the west. Zinnia stood on the porch, stretching slowly. Her tendons stood out. Muscles coiled beneath her sun-darkened skin. She looked up at the sky, eyes dark and deep like mountain stone. I am still alive, for real this time. Gideon stood beside her, arms crossed, watching her. Alive and free. Zinnia gently touched the bruised red mark on her neck, lips pressed together. Freedom was something I thought I had lost forever. Gideon looked at the old house, the cracked walls, the fractured windows, but in that moment, it looked like a fortress that had won a battle. This house has never stood so strong, he said. Zinnia smiled her first real smile, marked by pain, but also by the beginning of healing. Thank you, Gideon. Gideon shook his head. No, we did this together. A short while later, Marshal Briggs returned, leading 2 horses. He dismounted and handed Gideon a folder. Head to town by noon. We need Zinnia to testify and shut Vickers' file for good. Zinnia took a deep breath, gripping the axe handle. I am ready to face him to the end. Briggs nodded with sincere respect. You are braver than anyone I have ever met. Before mounting up, Gideon paused and turned toward the house. He picked up an old wooden sign from the yard, brushed off the dust, and propped it up on the porch. The faded letters still read, Lucky Home. Zinnia tilted her head. You really believe this place is lucky? Gideon replied. Any place that saves a life. That place is lucky. Zinnia looked at him for a long moment. In her eyes was respect and something more. You bought it for $5, she said. But the price you paid was not in money. Gideon gave the smallest smile, the kind of smile a man gives when he has found a reason to keep living. Maybe I do not yet know everything I have bought, but I know exactly what I will never let anyone take from me, you. Zinnia lowered her head slightly, almost shy, a rare thing for a warrior. I will not leave you again. Not until everything is finished. Briggs urged his horse forward. Let us ride, you two. The whole town is waiting for us to rewrite justice. Gideon reached out to help Zinnia onto the horse. She gripped his hand firmly, like a silent promise. Together, they rode off beneath the early sunlight, their shadows long across the ground. Bound together, unbreakable, a $5 house had brought a warrior and a chance to be a good man again. Dear friends, out here, in this harsh land where cruelty often runs wild, there are still those who choose to stand on the side of the light. They are not heroes, and they do not ask for praise. They are just decent people willing to reach out when someone else is about to fall, willing to say no to injustice, even when their own hearts are scarred. It is people like them who keep the last spark of hope alive in the Wild West. And sometimes, one act of kindness is enough to save an entire life. I am so grateful that you are here. I truly hope you are safe and happy wherever you are. I love all of you, my cherished listeners of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what you think of this story. Drop a comment below. Type "Enna" if you enjoyed it. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West.